Bum, bum, bum. Bum, 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 bum. Bum, 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 bum. Hey, everybody. Come on in here. Well, yes, this is where Coffee with Scott Adams happens every day at this same time. DJ Dr. Funk Juice, thank you for your continued support on Twitter. I know what you want now. Yeah, it's obvious. It's written all over your faces. You're looking for the simultaneous sip. Well, you came to the right place. You did. And all you need is a cup or a mug or a glass, a tankard, chalice or stein, a canteen, jug or flask, a vessel of any kind. Fill it with your favorite liquid. I like coffee. And join me now for the unparalleled pleasure, the dopamine hit of the day, the thing that makes everything better, the simultaneous sip. Go. So, as you're aware, the biggest news of the day is this coronavirus. This seems to have started in China from eating bats or something. I'm not sure I believe the story of where it's starting, but as you know, it's a major outbreak. It's killed 26 people, hundreds of people have been infected. China is closing entire cities. Entire cities are being closed. You can't get in, you can't get out unless you're a medical professional. So obviously this is the biggest story in the world, and equally obvious, if there's this gigantic virus problem, we don't have any kind of cure for it, we don't have shots for it. So I think it's obvious that the United States government would shut down all travel between China and the United States. Now, I haven't seen any stories on that, but it's obvious, right? I mean, there can't be this gigantic, deadly virus in China that's breaking out everywhere and they can't contain it. It's fairly obvious that the U.S. government has closed all travel between China and the United States. But I wanted to read you the official statement on this. So if you'll bear with me, let me find this on CNN. Looking for the official statement from our government about how they're closing all travel with China to shut down that virus. Okay, I don't see it on CNN, CNN.com, but I don't know, maybe they're just focusing on the impeachment or something. So let's go to Fox News, because obviously it's the biggest story in the country. And obviously our government is shutting down all travel. I mean, that would be the only way to keep us safe. Let's see, Fox News. No, it doesn't seem to be on Fox News either, which would suggest that it's not happening. I may have warned you in the title to this Periscope that there would be some extra cursing. This would be the point of the extra cursing. So if you don't want to hear any extra cursing, this would be the time to turn down your sound. Because there's a gigantic virus outbreak in China that's deadly. And as far as I can tell from my major news sources, the government of the United States has not yet shut down all travel with China. Here it comes. Are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? We have not shut down all travel with China. Are you fucking kidding me? Give me a reason. Any reason. This is fucking impeachable right here. Now, maybe there's a reason. Maybe there's a reason. But tell us the fucking reason. If you're not going to cut down, if you're not going to shut down all traffic with China right now, until you figure out what's going on, you owe us a fucking reason. All right? Government, give us a fucking reason, or shut it down. Otherwise, what the hell are you doing? So China, so far, if you connect our technology to China's technology, what do you get? You get a fucking spy virus, and they steal your intellectual property. So we can't connect to them technologically, because they'll just steal our shit and send us spyware. We can't have travel with them because they'll send us their fucking bat virus. We can't have any kind of economic agreement with them because apparently they fucking cheat. So is there anything that we can do with China that isn't toxic? Oh, okay, sure. We can at least accept mail from China. That's safe. No, it's not. Their mail is full of fucking fentanyl. We can't take their mail. We can't connect to them with the goddamn fucking technology. We can't let their people travel here because they're filled with their fucking bat virus. And we can't even do business with them. The fucking country is completely toxic. We need to decouple. Let's just decouple. All right, that's enough of that topic. But seriously, we need to shut down the travel, like right now. Let me give you a little update on Twitter and Google and the questions about some alleged shadow banning. I have a new hypothesis for why Twitter seems to sometimes, for some accounts, in some situations, you can follow people and then be unfollowed. If you're following this story, you know that Ambassador Grinnell, his account, many people, lots and lots of people, including me, reported following him multiple times, only to find later that they had somehow been unfollowed. So I did contact Jack Dorsey. I was asking about it, and he's looking into it. And I don't have an official answer yet. He asked some follow-up questions that I answered. So Twitter's looking into it. But while they were looking into it, and as I mentioned before, this TikTok app that is owned by a Chinese company can, under some situations, ask for permission to control your Twitter account. I guess if you're going to post your TikTok videos to Twitter, it needs some permissions. So one of the possibilities is that there's a third-party app that's controlling your Twitter. And so I looked into my Twitter permissions. I looked into my permissions for any apps to see if I had any apps that had permission to change my Twitter account. And here's the thing. I would never give an app, a third-party app, permission to control my Twitter feed. I would never do that. Now, there are a few exceptions. One is Periscope itself, because it's a Twitter product, so I don't have a problem with Periscope being able to change my Twitter account. It's all the same company. And I did have Hootsuite connected, because Hootsuite is an app that lets you post to different social platforms. But here's the surprise. I had several apps, minor apps, ones that you haven't even heard of, that had Twitter permissions that I was unaware of until I checked my phone. That's right. A person, me, who would never intentionally give a third-party app access to my Twitter account, had given 8 different, I think there were 8 of them, 8 different apps actually had permission to change my Twitter account. If you had asked me, I would have said 0, because I would never consciously make that decision, except in those few cases that are obviously safe. But there were several on there that were just apps I tried down at one point and another. Now, at what part in the process did I not see that those apps were asking for that permission? Because I never would have given that permission. Not in a million years, not intentionally. So here's my new hypothesis. It's third-party apps. So I would like to ask those of you who have had any experience of following and unfollowing anybody, or maybe even if you've been followed and unfollowed. So anybody who's had the experience of having an automatic unfollow that was not yours, check your phone. How do you check? I don't remember enough to tell you, but just Google it. How do you check your phone's app permissions, it'll pop right up. Just Google it and you'll see the directions. So if I had to rank the possibilities, the names of the apps actually don't matter. Because as I said, it was a variety of them. I had like 8 different apps. So you need to just check all of your permissions. Don't start with, do I have those specific apps? Just check all the permissions, because it's the ones that are sneaking in there that are the problem, maybe. So if we were to look at all the possible explanations for why Twitter seems to be performing in a way that we would not expect and had not authorized, the one is that it's senior management of Twitter trying to influence the election. Personally, I give that essentially 0 credibility, because human nature is not such that people who are already winners, in other words, if you're a senior management or you've got a ton of stock in Twitter, you're a winner in the game of life. I mean, you've done well, right? It would be insane for them to collectively decide that they would risk their reputations, their stock, their company, risk it all for a scheme that would be so obvious to detect, because we're all looking at it. We can detect it. We can see that you followed and unfollowed. So I would say the odds that Twitter management is behind it is basically 0. I'll always allow that there's always, anything could happen. You can never put really 0 on anything, but it's close to 0. The other possibility is that it's some kind of a bug. I think that's also close to 0, because it's so obvious. It's just so obvious that how would Twitter not know about it? How would they develop a product that's this ubiquitous, but it couldn't do the simplest thing technology can do, a little handshake between the app and the central servers that says, did you get my signal? Yes, I did. Okay, now I'm done. Simplest thing you could do in technology. So it's not a bug, and it almost certainly is not a senior management. But having seen now how many third-party apps could have done this, I would say the odds are something like 80% that there are bad actors from the outside who are messing with your Twitter feed. So that's my current speculation, current hypothesis. I'll keep you updated. I'm trying to schedule a discussion with Google about my demonetization on YouTube. Maybe I'll talk to them Monday. I'll update you on that as it happens. All right. You've heard, of course, about the FISA warrant story. Apparently, the Department of Justice looked at all the FISA warrants regarding this Russia collusion stuff and found that at least the last 2, because there were several renewals, the last 2 renewals they found were not were not legitimate, basically. They did not have a basis in law. Now, it was the last 2. What does that tell you? Well, unfortunately, we have at least 2 hypotheses that are reasonable. One hypothesis is that it was always biased, and it was rigged. So one possibility is that bad actors were using this process and abusing it, and they were using it to spy on the president and his team, and it was all bad actors. So that's possible. The other possibility that cannot be eliminated, based on what we know, is that once you get a little bit invested in your plan, it's hard to change. So it could be that people were just a little bit stuck in confirmation bias. There was a little bit of inertia going on, a sprinkle of incompetence. It would be easy to imagine that because the other ones had been renewed, that people just let their guard down. They just let their guard down. Well, the last one's got renewed. Here's another one. Blah. Sign it. Do the judges read every word of everything they sign? You hope so. But probably not if it's a renewal. If it's a renewal, you probably skim it, don't you? If you say, well, I've approved this thing 3 times in the past, it looks like it's just more of them. The same people I trusted last time say to sign it. Maybe you give it a cursory review, get on to other business. So I don't think you can eliminate the possibility of incompetence. But certainly, if you believe that there are bad actors, it's going to lead you in that direction. The president very cheekily retweeted a meme that I think came out a few years ago that showed him standing, it's a painting, that showed him standing next to a window inside Trump Tower, one assumes, with a Barack Obama on the outside of the window looking in. So in other words, it was a meme about Obama or his administration wiretapping or spying on the president. So rather than add any commentary, he just tweets the humorous meme, which I thought was kind of brilliant because it makes everybody talk about what it means. Anytime you can get people to talk themselves into the thing you wanted to say, as opposed to saying it to them, it's good. It's more persuasive to get somebody to work on the idea and come up with it on their own based on a few clues, if you can get them to do that, because that really makes them focus, and that's what he wants people to do. Focus on his point of view, that he was right all along, that the government, members of the government were spying on him and his campaign. At this point, you can just say it's true, right? I mean, it's two movies on one screen, so some people are going to say it's not true. But I think we can say, yeah, it's true. A funny story coming out, well, it's funny even though the topic is not funny. So there's nothing funny about discrimination, except maybe this story. So let me say that again. There's nothing funny about discrimination, except maybe this. There was a man, an African-American man, who is suing a Michigan bank for racial discrimination after he says the staff refused to deposit a settlement check from his other racial discrimination case. So the story as it's reported is that an African-American man successfully sued somebody, doesn't matter who, for racial discrimination and won. And he got a big check. So he takes his big check into a bank, and they look at him and they look at the check and they think, well, this doesn't fit. And they called the police on him. Now, like I say, there's nothing funny about discrimination, except this story, which is kind of funny, because first of all, he won a bunch of money. So in the end, he's kind of a winner. He's getting some attention. I'm sure he cares that his topic is getting attention too. So he's kind of a winner, and he's also a fighter. I like the fact that he's a fighter. And he fought the first case and he won. It happened again. He's fighting it again. I kind of like this guy. I don't know the details of the case, so I'm not going to presume who's guilty or innocent, but I like a fighter. But here's the thing. The story as it's told is that it's a story of discrimination being so bad that this one guy runs into two major examples of it, one after another. And that's entirely possible. So it might be that the way this is reported is exactly accurate. There's so much discrimination in the country that sometimes, maybe not often, but there's enough that sometimes you'll have two really bad cases right in a row. Maybe that's what happened, but there are at least two other possibilities. Two possibilities. The other possibility is it's fake news, because it fits in that category of news where by its nature, you should doubt it's true, right? Because it's a little too clean, it's a little too perfect, it's a little too, the edges are wrapped up just a little too nicely on this story. So I'm not saying it's a fake news. I'm saying that the nature of the story fits into the category of stories that are probably fake news at least 80% of the time. That doesn't mean his is. I'm just saying it's in that category where you should just automatically put a filter on it and say, maybe, but it's in that category. It's a little too perfect. Here's the other possibility, a third possibility. And again, I'm not saying that there was not two cases of grotesque discrimination. It's entirely possible, if not likely, that that's what happened. But here's the other possibility. Maybe it's him. Maybe it's him. Now, I'm not saying it is, but I think it's funny that that possibility is not considered. There's one of my favorite comics from long ago was a guy sitting in jail, and he was saying to his bunkmate, he goes, 17 arrests, 17 convictions. Maybe it's me. I've been laughing about that for years because it's a joke about how the last thing we consider is that it's us. Because it's always something else. It's other people. And when I say maybe it's him, I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying that if you're looking at all the possibilities of this story, one you can't rule out is that he looks suspicious. Not because he's black, but because some people just look suspicious. Am I right? You know who else looks suspicious? Me. I have a lifelong problem that I look suspicious. I can't tell you how many times I've been accused of things I haven't done. All the time. And I think the reason that people regard me as suspicious is because they think I'm clever enough to get away with stuff. And if you're clever enough to get away with stuff, well, maybe you're doing it now. So in my own way, I'm one of those people who has gone through life continually being questioned about my honesty or my credibility when I'm actually being honest and totally credible. I am one of those personalities that people don't trust for whatever reason. I hope you do, and I hope I've created enough of a track record that I have credibility on here. But I'm just saying that in my interpersonal life, it's common for people to imagine I've done all manner of bad things when I haven't. So one possibility is that there's something about this individual that has nothing to do with his color that made the teller at the bank say, there's something wrong with this situation. It has nothing to do with his ethnicity. So that's a possibility. Anyway, but good luck to the individual involved. I do not mean to suggest anything beyond what the story itself said, that he got discriminated against twice. He's a fighter. Good for him. I hope he fights and wins this if the story is accurately reported. Let's talk about Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan has lit the Twitter sphere on fire by saying recently, I guess, on his podcast that he says, quote, I think I'll probably vote for Bernie. And here's the reasoning he offered. He's been insanely consistent his entire life. He's basically been saying the same thing, been for the same thing his whole life. And that in and of itself is a very powerful structure to operate from. What's that mean? What does it mean to say that consistency is a powerful structure to operate from? Well, I would put a different word on it. I would call it authenticity. Because I think that's what both Trump and Bernie have in common in a weirdly different way. But there's something about the fact that Bernie is always Bernie that makes you trust that at least he has good intentions and that at least he believes what he says, which is a lot, right? So when Joe Rogan says that, that alone, that consistency, and I do believe that all of the people running for president actually have the best interest of the country in mind. I really do believe that. I don't think you put that much work and risk into running for president until you've really bought off on the idea that you're trying to help the country. I just don't, in our system, I don't think you get that far unless you really believe that. So I believe Bernie believes that, as well as all the other candidates. So how did that work out for Joe Rogan? Well, not so well. You would think that backing Bernie would be the safest thing he could ever do, right? Because if you want the social justice warriors to be happy, well, pick a Democrat, right? Safest thing you could do in this country. If you're a public figure and you're in the entertainment field, by far the safest thing you could do for your career, your own personal safety, for everything. Pick a Democrat. That did not work out as well as he may have hoped, because it turns out he's now being accused of being a white nationalist transphobe. You can't even win. There's just no way to win. Now, obviously, if anybody has spent any time watching Joe Rogan, he's definitely not a white nationalist, or even close. Right? He's not even in the zip code of a white nationalist. So this accusation against him, this is one, idiots on Twitter saying this stuff. This is the most grotesquely defamatory. It's just horrible. Just horrible that he would be slimed by that kind of accusation. Now the transphobe thing, at least there's a little meat on that in the sense that he's talked about athletes and that there's a risk to female athletes if there's a larger somebody who was born with male body parts and testosterone competes, blah blah blah. The smaller person can get hurt. So that has targeted him for for abuse from the left. So he kind of created a position where he can't win. But let me pile on a little bit. May I pile on? Sure, why not? So I love Joe Rogan, personally and as an entertainment professional, one of the best people in the world, one of the best entertainers in the world. Nothing negative to say about him. But I don't think he's an economist. Is that fair to say? If I said that to Joe Rogan in front of him, I said, Joe, I understand why you're backing Bernie, but would you agree that you do not have a deep understanding of economics? I think he'd say yes. Would that be an unfair statement? That's not an insult. It's not an ad hominem. It's the same thing I said about Greta. And I'm not insulting Greta, Thunberg on climate change. It's not an insult. It is simply a statement that some people have experience in different domains. And I think that while I completely appreciate, and in fact I've said the same thing, that Bernie's authentic personality is much to be admired. On many levels I admire it. I have mad respect for Bernie for that reason. But it's still an economic decision, isn't it? I mean, no matter what you think of Bernie's character, the ultimate decision of Bernie versus not Bernie is really an economic decision. And I don't know how you could make a decision about voting for Bernie without a background, or at least enough background on the basic concepts of economics. So I feel sorry for Joe Rogan. I'm sure he doesn't feel sorry for himself. I doubt that's in his mental vocabulary to feel sorry for himself. I get the sense that that's just an unproductive feeling that he would be unlikely to experience because he's mentally very tough. Or so it appears. We can't read his mind. But if he ever thought that backing Bernie was going to be the safe harbor, I don't know if he thought that. But if he did think that, I guess he found out otherwise. Here's another story. I'll be talking about impeachment in a minute. Did you hear about the Pillowcase Rapist? So there was somebody named the Pillowcase Rapist because he would put a pillowcase over his head many times. And he was a serial rapist. There were lots of unsolved rapes. And he was just caught, they're pretty sure they caught him, because his son got in some legal trouble and they got the son's DNA. And as soon as they ran the son's DNA through the database, boop, they found that it matched close enough to be a close relative of whoever was the actual rapist. And then it was a simple matter to find out that that guy's father also had some prior criminal record in that domain. And then it was easy matter to pick him up, test his DNA, and they got him. Here's my point to all this. We are at a point right now, we don't have to wait for anything. We already have everything we need, and this is going to happen guaranteed. 100% of serial murderers and serial rapists will now be caught probably in the next 12 months. Think about that. We now have the technology that if we have some DNA, and I would say that in the case of a serial anything, you're always going to have DNA, right? Serial rapist, you're going to get some DNA somewhere. Serial murderer, you're going to get some DNA. All right, guaranteed. You're going to get some. If they keep doing that kind of crime, you're always going to get some. So in the next 12 months, thanks to companies like Othram that can do this kind of thing. They can look in a database and find out if you're related to anybody and then track you down. 2020 is the year. Think about this. This is enormous. 2020 is the year that 100% of serial violent crimes get solved. All of them. Every one of them. I think. I don't think we'll have a single one left on the books by the end of this year. I mean, just think about that. That's mind-blowing. You know, I predicted years ago in my book, The Deliberate Future, that all crime would be solved in our lifetime. And here's the first concrete example. All serial crimes, violent ones, will be solved. All of them. If you're tracking my predictions, and you should, here's one that's starting to shape up. How many of you have laughed at me? Ha ha ha, cartoon boy. Stick to Garfield, as they like to say. When I said that Kamala Harris would be the Democratic nominee. Ha ha ha, you're so wrong, Scott, because of all the reasons. And then she suspended her campaign. Double ha ha ha, Scott. Ha ha ha, you're so wrong, she's not even in the race anymore. And then I said, hold, because she has another path to the White House. And that path is now being talked about by more people than me, including the New York Times, including the Sacramento Bee. They're now talking up. Senator Harris has been weighing an endorsement of Joe Biden. Oh, that's interesting. Kamala Harris is now, it's being reported in the New York Times, that Kamala is considering endorsing Joe Biden. Huh. Interesting, isn't it? And Sacramento Bee reports that they interviewed Joe Biden and they asked him about picking Kamala Harris as a VP, and he said, would he consider it? He said he'd consider her for anything she wants, including vice president. He would consider her for anything she wants, including vice president. Now, if you were to look at Kamala Harris on her own, you'd say, not so strong. In fact, that's why she had to suspend her campaign, because compared to the other Democratic candidates, she didn't quite have the necessary parts. But she's a really good complement for Joe Biden, meaning that she's tiptoed into the progressive field a little bit, but not so much that she can't pull back and become a little bit more mainstream and still have a little bit of credentials in that progressive field. Because we like people who used to be something and then changed their mind, even though we say we didn't. Because we at least know that they've lived in both heads. They lived in, they used to be a Democrat, now they're a Republican. That's an advantage, I would say, is somebody who's lived in both worlds. They've got a little appreciation. We treat it as if it's flip-flopping and as if it's a fault, but probably not. Now, the reason that she's a good complement to Biden is that Biden's opinions will be the focus, and she would just be a supporter. And as just a supporter, she's not going to say too much that isn't just what Biden is saying, and so there won't be much ammunition to go after her for her own opinions. Nor does she need to be especially charismatic. Remember, I told you that it's going to be very hard for Biden to pick a running mate if he gets nominated, because he's got to pick a running mate that's a worse version of himself, because that's the best look. Because you want to think, oh, the top person is definitely the top person, but you've got an emergency spare, it's a little smaller, it can get you 50 miles. That's all you need. Just a good, small tire emergency spare. It won't take you all around the world, but it'll get you to the service station. Kamala is the exact antidote to Biden. She's young and she's experienced. She's a senator. She knows where all the parts are, so she knows how the town works. Her weaknesses will be somewhat hidden by being a vice presidential candidate, but her strengths will be magnified, because every time you see them or talk about them, you're saying, okay, he did pick a woman. He did pick a person of color. Check, check. We have less to worry about. Now you say to yourself, but Scott, Kamala Harris is not popular in the black community. Does it matter? Doesn't matter, because Biden is. Biden will give her what she needs at the same time that she's giving him what he needs, which is the emergency spare tire in case he fails. And he's unlikely to, even if he were to win, which is deeply unlikely, he is very unlikely to go for a second term because of age. Who's the obvious next candidate if he doesn't go for a second term? His vice president pick. If he picks the right vice president, she would be established. Now, the best part of this is that Kamala and Biden have the most endorsements from establishment Democrats, which means the establishment likes them. And I believe that Warren has the most connections to the Hillary Clinton machine, if you will. So it looks like Hillary Clinton will be the shadow president under the scenario that Biden wins and has Warren as the vice president. That would basically put Hillary Clinton back in the White House without having to run because of the chain of influence. All right, let's talk about, so I put that out there. If you're tracking my predictions, that would be one of the most wild predictions I've made. And it's shaping up to be more likely than you think. That's more likely than you think. Here's another one. Do you remember that from the start of this whole impeachment business, I kept saying that there was one defense that I'm not hearing from even the supporters of the president that needs to be the defense. And what I said was that you need to establish that there was a national interest in looking into the Biden-Burisma situation. And did you know how frustrated I was getting? Because for weeks, I don't know how long, but it seemed like weeks, I kept saying, you just have to say there was a national interest, and you're done. That's it. That's the whole story. Was there a national interest? Yes. If it's yes, it doesn't matter that it's also good for the president. So here's what's developing. So as I started out being, I think, just about the only person who was saying that, and now we see that it's Lindsey Graham's primary argument. So Lindsey Graham is saying, we don't want to call witnesses because we don't think we need them. But if we did, the central question is going to be, did the president have a legitimate reason to look into Burisma and Biden? And there's a suggestion, yes. On top of that, the Democrats' own defense, or not defense, but the Democrats' own lawyers have made the case that President Trump believed what they call conspiracy theories about Ukraine. They say he believed that Ukraine had interfered in the elections. That, my friends, should be the end of the impeachment. Because all you need to know is the evidence that the Democrats themselves have introduced. All you have to do is accept it, accept their case. Don't accept even the Republicans' case. If you accept the Democrats' own framing for this, it's over. Because the Democrats have suggested strongly, and based on actual evidence of the president's conversations with real people who report them, there is real reporting from direct evidence people that the president seemed, as far as they could tell, to believe that Ukraine was legitimately something to be looked into. Now, as long as the president believed that to be the case, does it matter if it's true? It doesn't. Because the entire case revolves around the president's intentions. And if it was true that he legitimately believed, as the Democrats themselves are reporting, this is not even the Republicans' case. This is the Democrats' case against him. They say he believed the conspiracy theories about Ukraine. We're done. If he believed it, their own case, that's what he said, that's what they say, that's all you need. Because he can be wrong and not get impeached. It is not impeachable to make an assumption which is wrong. It is not impeachable to believe something that turns out to not be true. But beyond that, if we have witnesses, you can guarantee that Hunter Biden's right on the top of the list. So Lindsey Graham has focused on this. By far, he has the best framing for how this whole thing should be run. The best framing outside of Alan Dershowitz, who says you don't even need to talk about the details because it's just, it doesn't meet the constitutional test on the surface, so the details are irrelevant. You don't even need to get that far. But you saw I did a big tweet thread on the same point saying that the main question is whether Burisma was worth looking into from a national interest. You saw that Rush Limbaugh, or I told you, Rush Limbaugh did an extended segment talking about my tweets and talking about the same point, that there was a national interest to look into this stuff. And now we see in the New York Times, they printed an opinion piece by Josh Blackman, a constitutional law professor at South Texas College of Law in Houston. And he basically explains that it's completely acceptable in our system to have a president do something that's in his own mind primarily for re-election, that's not impeachable, as long as there's also an argument that has something to do with the national good. It doesn't matter if it's 90-10. 90% of it is for my own good, or 99% of it's for my own good. It doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter if the candidate thinks 100% of it is only for their self-interest, so long as there's also a national argument. And there is. There is a genuine national concern. So the New York Times, of course, it's an opinion piece. That doesn't mean that the New York Times editorial board or anybody else agrees with it, but they printed it. So now you're seeing that the weight of argument is shifting in that direction. So if you're trying to determine if I'm causing the simulation to change or simply predicting it, well, hard to tell, isn't it? I'll just leave that out there. And even Jay Sekulow has said that question is now relevant, because he said that the Bidens were now fair game in the trial because the Democrats have, quote, opened the door. So in legal terms, if one side brings up a topic, that makes it fair game for the other side to discuss it. Now you could argue that they shouldn't have brought it up, but they did. So now the Democrats have opened that question of whether the Burisma-Biden thing was appropriate, which means if they want more witnesses, they're going to have witnesses on that topic. And also Senator Josh Hawley, Republican in Missouri, is also echoing the same point. He says, it's now clear we absolutely must call Hunter Biden, and we probably need to call Joe Biden. So you see that the president's defense is starting to move toward that. Now, the other day, yesterday I think, some people pushed back a little bit because I said that the president's lawyers were very good. They're excellent lawyers. I said that they have so far botched the defense. Let me clarify that. They're not done with the defense. So one cannot say that they have botched the defense like as a statement of the end, because we're closer to the beginning than the end. When the president's defense seriously kicks into gear, I think they're just going to demolish the Democrats. What I said in terms of it botched so far, I'm going to stick to that, because now that you've seen the Lindsey Graham framing, and now Sekulow's framing and Josh Hawley's framing, my framing, Rush Limbaugh, you see a lot of people thinking about this and watching, saying, maybe the focus should have been that one question. And if I said to you, tell me the president's defense. All right, if you watched the opening statements from the president's lawyers, what's their defense? I actually don't know. Do you? If I said, what do you remember from what the Democrats are saying about the president? You probably remembered, because they've repeated it so many times, they're focusing on it. They're withholding the information because the president tried to force a foreign country to interfere with our elections. You know what the Democrats are saying, right? They're saying he used it to dig up dirt and that they're withholding documents. That's all you know. All the details the public doesn't know. It's just too confusing. But you know that. Now do it the other way. What's the president's defense? Not from me, but what's the president's defense as so far expressed by his defenders in the impeachment? I don't know. I watched it and I actually don't know. I think it was something like, your accusations don't have merit. I don't know. But here's what it should have been. It should have been, there's only one relevant question. Did the president have a legitimate interest in looking into Biden and Burisma? The Democrats say he did have a good reason. That's really the end of the case. So we yield our time to the Democrats. Our entire defense will be 5 minutes, that he had a good reason to look into it, and the Democrats have acknowledged that because they say, he believed that there was something there. That's what they say. We believe it too. So we're all on the same page. We all believe that the president thought there was something legitimate in terms of the national interest that should be looked at. That's it. I wouldn't say anything else. I wouldn't defend my president's, confidentiality with their advisors and all that stuff. It's all important. But if you're trying to convince the public, you need to keep it simple, and I don't think that's happened. So I expect them to focus in on that point. All right, let's talk about Schiff and his presentation. I'm going to start with a positive, and I said this before. Schiff is like the Energizer Bunny. I have never seen Schiff look tired. Have you? Have you ever seen him look tired? Now, I think he's pure evil, but man, the guy's got energy. He's like a pit bull. And as I said before, I'd recently learned that he also was he runs marathons and triathletes and stuff. It turns out that Schiff is like a really good athlete. I'm actually very impressed, and that's a good role model. And I don't want to lose that good part just because the other part is pure evil. So was it, I think CNN had this headline, Schiff gets choked up during emotional speech. What? What theater were you watching? I didn't see Schiff get choked up. I saw him pretending to be choked up. Do you think Schiff is really choked up about any of this stuff? Do you think he even believes his case? I don't think there's a slight case that he even believes his own case. So it's hilarious that he fooled anybody into thinking he had genuine emotion in this. That was not genuine emotion. That was just acting. So I've been mocking Schiff for his many cases of loserthink, as I describe in my best-selling book, Loserthink, all the bad ways of thinking and arguing. And he uses all of them. Laura Ingraham pointed out the mind reading. So he makes lots of assumptions about what strangers were thinking in their secret thoughts. He also uses laundry list persuasion, which is bad persuasion because if you don't have one good reason, you have to give 10. And it makes you think, well, there's no one good reason, but if you put all 10 together. So he's doing laundry list persuasion, mind reading. He's doing half opinions. A half opinion is where you show one side. Now, because this is a domain in which people are just being advocates, of course they're only doing their side. But in terms of loserthink, showing one side of a decision is irrational. It's not irrational in terms of persuasion, but I'll talk about that. He shows the failure of imagination. How many times have you seen Schiff say, what other explanation is there except this? Well, if you can't think of another explanation for the facts you're seeing, it could be because there's only one explanation. It could also be because you're not good at thinking up alternate explanations. It could be just a failure of your own imagination. If you can't think of more than one reason to explain the facts you see, the problem might be on your end. You can't tell the difference. They look exactly the same. Then, of course, confirmation bias. He acts like every piece of evidence fits together in this big mosaic, but in fact, that's not how life works. Lots of times it's just confirmation bias. Now, people ask me, why are you saying that Schiff was winning yesterday, at the same time you're saying he's using all this loser think and it's all just irrational babble. Those two things are not incompatible. When I talk about persuasion, the things that matter the most is what messages are getting through. How much time are you spending on it, and what was that message? He's spending a lot of time making at least the people watching the news focus on what he wants you to focus on. That is a gigantic persuasion win. The fact that in the process of doing that, he's using exclusively almost loser think. There's lies, there's stuff taken out of context. The videos he's showing are just lies. They're just taken out of context to reverse their meaning. He's irrational, he's reading minds. Does any of that matter? Not really. Because my book before Loser Think was Win Bigly, Persuasion in a World Where Facts Don't Matter. What he's trying to do is not be logical. He's not trying to convince a judge or a real jury who might try really hard to concentrate on facts. He's trying to persuade the public. And you don't need good thinking to persuade the public. You just need your message to be repeated a lot, focused on, have an emotional content. That's about it. So his completely irrational loser think arguments are very effective because of how much time he's getting and the fact that we haven't heard yet the rebuttal. I would expect the situation to reverse when the defense is doing its full push. He's going to get annihilated. Don Lemon has a little legal problem. You may know this. It's an older story, but it's bubbling up again. I'm not sure why. But there's a man who's suing Don Lemon, CNN host, for allegedly a sexual assault. Now, I don't want to give you the details of it, but let's just say something creepy happened at a bar. Drinking was involved. Nobody took their clothes off. I don't want to get into the details, but it's a creepy accusation if it happened. Now, of course, CNN is quite famous for Me Too stories, as really the entire press is famous for that. There are a lot of them. But the question for CNN is, when do you believe the accuser? Because the accuser's got a story that, on the surface, sounds pretty credible. I think there were witnesses. I think there were multiple witnesses, actually. Now, if those multiple witnesses are saying the same thing, and that's the early reporting that they are, why does CNN keep him on the payroll? It's a good question, right? Now, I'm very much in favor of innocent until proven guilty. So if he worked for me, if I were his boss, I would definitely keep him on the payroll. And I would also have kept everyone else on the payroll who was accused of things while the trial or the process is working its way through. But here's all I want to say about that. If CNN ever did decide to cancel Don Lemon, let's say the lawsuit went someplace, would we ever see this headline, CNN sours on Lemon? That's all. That's the whole reason I'm telling you this story, because I don't care too much about it other than, will we ever see Fox News with this headline, CNN sours on Lemon? Well, I hope so. Well, no, I don't hope that anything bad happens to him. I just hope, if something does, that we get a funny headline out of it. But I don't wish anything bad on anybody. All right, so there was an interesting poll from National Emerson College poll. And they asked supporters of the various Democratic candidates if they'd be willing to support any Democratic nominee if their preferred one doesn't get picked. So at the top of the list was Elizabeth Warren. So 90% of the people who want Warren to be the nominee also say that they would support, well, whoever gets nominated. That's good. Biden's at 87%, Buttigieg's 86%, so they're clustered toward the top around that 90%. So what does that tell you? Well, let's keep going. So Bloomberg, 78, he's sort of in the middle of the pack. And then at the bottom, it gets interesting. Sanders, only 54% of the people who say they want Sanders as their first choice are willing to pick just any old Democrat if it's not him. Only half? And Yang's at exactly half. Yang supporters say that only half of them would support the Democrat if it's not Yang. Half. Only half of them. So what's that tell you? What does that tell you about who would be the stronger candidate? Well, I think this is sort of upside down from what you think. If you think that the best candidate, well, let me put it this way. I'll go right to the punchline. The reason that Yang has only 50% of the people who say they want him to be president would be willing to support any Democrat is clearly because they're not Democrats. In other words, Yang and Sanders are picking up a whole bunch of support from people who don't maybe consider themselves quite totally Democrat. They might be independents. In some cases, they might actually be Republicans who just happen to like this one guy, Yang, because he's more science-based or whatever it is. So I'll tell you what this tells me, that the two candidates with the biggest chance of beating Trump would be Sanders and Yang. And here's why. I believe that the Democrats who are just solid Democrats are just going to vote Democrat. All the ones, even the ones who say, 90% of them say that they would support Warren, but that's their first choice, but 10% of them apparently would not support the other candidate if it's somebody else. I don't believe that. I believe that something like 100% of the people who support Warren, probably 100% of them, will still, no matter what, vote Democrat, because the alternative is Trump, right? But what about those Sanders and Yang people, where about half of the people said they wouldn't support the other Democrat? Well, if you did pick Sanders or Yang, doesn't that suggest you would pick up a lot of independents and Republicans that you couldn't get with any other candidate? Am I wrong? I feel like I need to be checked on the logic of that. But my logic is Sanders and Yang are clearly signaling that they can pick up people who are not Democrats. Because if they were solid Democrats, half of them would not abandon their candidate just because another Democrat got elected. I feel like this poll is telling us as clearly as possible. I might be wrong about this. I feel like I'm not quite confident in my opinion on this. I feel like it's saying Yang and Sanders are the ones that could beat Trump. All right. There's a study that says 1/3 of household food is wasted. This is important because I've been saying forever that the way to balance the budget is to figure out how to lower the cost of living a high-quality life. Now, do you know why 1/3 of the food in American households is wasted? Well, a variety of reasons, right? But one of the big reasons given is that you have to drive to get the food. In our system, you have to get in the car, you got to plan it, and you go and drive and get some food. And what does that cause you to do? Well, it causes you to buy more food than you need today because you don't want to drive every day. So you buy a bunch of food. Some of it goes bad before you eat the stuff that you like the most. So there's something about your food being far away from where you want to eat it that causes 1/3 of it to be wasted. There are other factors, so that probably doesn't explain the whole third. But that's the hypothesis for why it's so wasted. And it was I saw this in the context of how to design a proper future city where your food is close to you. So you can just walk outside. So let's say it's 4:30 in the afternoon and you want to eat dinner at 6. You just walk outside, 10 minutes away, there's a market, you grab a bag full of fresh food, and you go eat what you bought today. So if you designed the way people live to be more efficient, you could cut their food costs by 1/3. By 1/3. And they'd be not only just as happy, they would be happier because the food that they did eat would be fresher. So I think there's a gigantic opportunity to lower the national debt because if you can lower the cost of living in general, then all of the people who need a little extra help won't need as much help. And that's where most of our money's going. Here's an interesting little signal of things to come. I talked about this before, but I'm going to add a point to it. So I talked about how the president agreeing to be part of the trillion tree planting to combat climate change, and the fact that he recently said it wasn't a hoax, strongly suggests that the president is sort of migrating toward the center. The center being, that climate change is enough to worry about. We don't know everything about everything. Maybe we can't predict the future too accurately. Maybe the alarm is too high, but it's something to worry about. So you can see the president shifting toward the middle. Now, I said that before, but we also see Democrats starting to embrace nuclear power, especially the newer types they're safer. Generation 4 is coming down the pike if we can develop it quickly enough. Doesn't melt down because it's built so it can't. And it eats existing nuclear waste as its fuel in some cases. So you're watching two things happening. You saw two highly polarized camps. AOC is saying it's the end of the world, we're all going to die. Trump originally saying, it's all a hoax. Completely opposites. But every time there's a new story that says the temperatures are the highest they've been or whatever, it gets a little more convincing that something's happening, whether it's man-made or partly man-made or not. But there is some general agreement that the temperatures look like they're going up. And it looks like Trump is sort of drifting toward the middle, which is absolutely the smartest thing he should do politically. Forget about the science. Politically, it's a no-brainer. Politically, drifting toward the middle is exactly what you want to do because that's such a big issue, and it's going to be a big issue for the election. So you're seeing both sides drifting toward the middle. I think it's because we're now recognizing a common enemy. It's the difference between the two sides thinking that the other is the enemy, which is where we've been, right? The Green New Deal people are saying you Republicans are the enemy because you're going to get us all killed. And the Republicans are saying you Green New Deal people are the enemy because you're going to ruin our economy and get us all killed. But it feels like this gradual move to the center is because both sides are finally realizing there's a common enemy. The temperature. Now, I'm not going to get into the debate of what's real and what's not. I'm just talking about the politics of it, that it's drifting toward the middle. And here's another sign of it. There was one of the articles on Fox News, which famously is pro-Trump, and that's the important point. So Fox News, a very pro-Trump entity, has this headline: Did Trump have a change of heart over climate change policy? It talks about, on the 5, Greg Gutfeld was talking about the same topic, and noting that the president seems, because of the trillion tree planting, it seems he's softened on his position, moving toward the middle a little bit. Here's the interesting part. There was nothing in this article that was negative about climate change. It was just straight up reporting that, this is what the 5 said, and this is what the president did. Now, I feel as if a year ago that would not have looked the same. I feel as if Fox News would have said something a little more skeptical sounding because its readership is certainly, many of them are in that camp. So it's looking to me like there's something happening there. Now, as you know, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy is working on a plan for energy and clean climate. Those two things are really the same topic. And we might see some good stuff coming out of there. And so we're definitely seeing a movement on the Republican side toward accepting at least the risk of climate change. So that's a big deal. Here's another little thing that's bubbling up. Apparently, the White House has invited Israel's prime minister and his main political rivals to Washington. This is weird, isn't it? So the White House has invited, Netanyahu, but also his main political rivals, the people who disagree with him, to meet with them in Washington to talk about a potential Palestinian peace plan. Makes sense to me, because if you can't get Israel to agree on a plan, internally, well, you're done, right? So step one, get the Israelis on roughly the same page so that there's at least one less thing to worry about before you even talk to anybody else. Why are they doing that now? I think maybe it's because conditions are changing. And there are apparently massive hundreds of thousands of people protesting in Iraq to get the U.S. out, and we've said, at least preliminarily, we've said no, they're not leaving. So, and also, you know, you're up to date on everything with Iran, and we'd like to have some kind of a nuke deal with Iran that actually did prevent them from getting nuclear weapons, which we don't have now. Here's what I think. And they're also talking about the White House has delayed a few times their big peace plan ideas for the Palestinian-Israeli situation, but that maybe they're starting to ramp up again, because they wouldn't call Israel in to a meeting if they weren't serious about trying to ramp it up again. Here's what's interesting. Look what we have to offer now. Now, if you believe that Iran is the biggest influence on the Palestinians, and let's say Hezbollah, and the anti-Israel forces in general, the proxies, what's different? Well, Soleimani is no longer on the playing field. So the main military guy who was causing the main military problems is now off the chessboard. And because Iran did that, semi-fake attack, they've said, well, we're done retaliating. And as far as I know, and maybe the reporting is not good on this yet, but as far as I know, they have stuck to calling, not winding down, but at the moment, the proxies that you would expect to be active don't seem extra active. I mean, I'm sure that there will always be some missiles lobbed toward our allies or us, but it looks like something in Iran is different. Their economy is on the brink, so they're probably more flexible than ever. At the same time, Iraq's citizens, at least a lot of them, seem to want us to leave. What this creates is, for the first time, all of the variables have fell into place for a big deal. And it goes like this. And, of course, the U.S. is not going to offer this unless it's the last thing. In order to get a peace deal, we would need Iran to stand down from its proxies, stop supporting, terror. You would need Iran to agree to negotiate on some kind of a deal that had more teeth in return for, sanctions coming off their economy. But here's the big one. And this asset just got created out of nothing. It might be that what we have to negotiate is leaving Iraq, which we want to do anyway. The president has created a situation in which he can say, I got something to trade. Here's something to trade. How about we get out of the Middle East? Would Iran consider themselves victorious if they got the United States military out of the Middle East, or at least reduced its footprint to something manageable? Iran would actually call that a victory, wouldn't it? And I think it would be. I think they could legitimately say it was a major victory if they got the U.S. out of the Middle East, at least in substantial ways in Iraq anyway. I think that's a deal under the right circumstances we might be willing to make, because we want to leave anyway, but we don't want to leave until it's a good idea to leave. So I'm thinking that we've never had this situation before, where Iran is presumably desperate for a deal because their economy is on the brink. We have something to give, which is us leaving Iraq, which doesn't cost us much, which is the ultimate deal situation. You want a situation where somebody can give up something that's the key to the deal, but the thing they're giving up didn't cost them much. So it's possible to give it up. It's possible for us to give up Iraq under the right conditions. And then the other thing that's the right conditions is that you've got a deal maker as a president, and everybody recognizes that. Everybody in the Middle East understands that this president will make a deal. It's not dogma. He's a deal maker. And that gets in their heads, and I think that actually makes it more likely to do a deal, simply because when they think of the president, they think of deal making. And we're such simple creatures that if you just say, this guy's a deal maker, a deal maker, a deal maker, if you hear that enough, what do you start thinking? Just uncritically, you say to yourself, maybe we can make a deal. So just the fact that his reputation as a deal maker greatly increases the chance that people's minds will be in deal-making mode. That's a huge deal, and it's invisible, right? It's just part of the benefit of this president is he brings that with him to every situation, and it takes everybody's mind to deal-making because they think, well, that's the variable we're dealing with now. But the other thing we've never had before is the strongest, I think, the strongest leaders we've ever had in all areas there. We have some really capable leaders. And I'm even talking about, Iran. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia. Sure. We got our problems, right? Yeah, sure. MBS, needs to explain why he's killing journalists. But Saudi Arabia is a solid, ally at this point, and they've got a strong leader who's also a deal maker. He's willing to do what other people were not willing to do. Netanyahu, obviously a deal maker. Iran, always deal makers. Iran, they're deal makers. So we have the most deal making, solid, sane people we've ever had dealing. Probably Soleimani was the big problem there. And we may be finding out that his absence makes everything better. So I think I hit all of my main points here. I think I did. All right. Somebody says he wasn't a journalist. He was really just a spy for somebody. Yeah, I saw the thing about so Elizabeth Warren wants to cancel student debt, and a citizen confronted her and said, what about all the money I paid? Why am I being penalized for being good at saving? And I would say, that's a good question. And it's probably why this whole student debt thing will never work. All right. Thank you. Oh, people are complimenting me on my Periscope today. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I will talk to you all later.